Good morning and welcome to this webinar today. And my name is Bill Baker. I'm with Firestorm, and we're pleased to have you joining us for this Tennessee Association of Independent Schools Forum webinar. This is part of the Crisis Coach webinar series, and this is the 2016 series. And we appreciate the Tennessee Association of Independent Schools of being our host and sponsor for the past year. We also would like you to become our friend. Firestorm Solutions on Facebook. Our Twitter, if you want to follow us there, is Firestorm Soul. There is a hashtag. That hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value and empowers you to manage risks and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. We'd like to remind you, though, that the presentation today is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion, and the work product must be reviewed in conjunction with advice from your organization's personal counsel. In addition, do not interpret the advice and comments as legal advice or legal opinion. We're pleased to have this webinar series underwritten by the Tennessee Association of Independent Schools. If you want to watch past webinars in this series, you can go to firestorm.com, and you can also register for future webinars in that series. Today, we're discussing crisis or consequence management, and our presenter will be Jim Satterfield, the president of Firestorm. We're also pleased to have Rich Martin with us from the Tennessee Association of Independent Schools. Rich, over to you, please.
Thanks, Bill, and welcome to all of you who are joining us for this first Firestorm Crisis Management webinar of the 2016 calendar year, in the middle of the 2015-16 school year. And we're looking forward to continuing to bring these webinars to you and to help schools be prepared for the range of dangerous situations that are always in about to hit us, and we never know where they're coming from. So best to be prepared, and Firestorm is helping us do that. So back to you, Bill, and we look forward to another interesting webinar.
And thanks, Rick. Appreciate it. And if it's part of Bill, we're getting a little feedback here. Somebody's mic is open. If we can, I think we've gotten it blocked now, so that's good. Thank you. But by the way, for everybody that's listening, I don't know if you know it or not, but Rich is the person in Tennessee that won the lottery last night. So he only got a third of the $1.6 billion, but he still came to work today to help schools in the state of Tennessee, and that's an exciting commitment that's done on his part. So, Rich, please remember me now that you're famous and rich all at the same time and going together. Unfortunately, most of the worry, and we're going to still face and deal with the issues that are present in our schools, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about crisis management and consequence management and how to know if this crisis is about to occur so that we can intervene before it escalates. I would remind you that on March the 3rd, there is a Crisis Coach workshop in Tennessee, sponsored by the association, and I would encourage you all to come and bring your plans with you. We're going to go through and help you analyze them and see how they align to standards and best practices, and give you some practical advice on updating them, and we'll do an exercise there. Speaking of exercises, there is something I'd like you to put on your calendar, and that's on February the 18th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central. There will be an active shooter virtual exercise for schools. So you can have your crisis management team sitting around in a classroom or in a conference room and participate. We anticipate 1,000 schools going through this active shooter exercise, and we'll be focusing on identifying the behaviors of concern before the event, the actual event, and the consequence management thereafter. Again, that's February the 18th. It's at 2 p.m. Eastern. It's a 2-hour exercise. I would strongly encourage you to come, and it's available at no cost. Part of our affiliation with the Tennessee Association of Independent Schools is making this possible, and it's always good to see your membership continue to help and become involved. So when we think about crisis and risk, and the risk is around all of us, even before the events are occurring, but recognizing that it's about to happen and it's going to elevate there is really where we're going to put our conversation today and give you some new tools to go with what you already have. Now, obviously, a crisis is a turning point. Whether your school becomes known for this particular area or not, it is where we want to see, because the trend of the future events will be determined by how you respond in this crisis. Now, we did a survey last year across a wide range of schools, and we asked them, do you use external intelligence to identify potential threats? And you'll see less than a third did. So that meant that there's a great opportunity for you to start to design an intelligence program to see if the risk and threats that you've identified, that you're concerned about, are about to occur. And so we're going to spend some time today and give you some steps that you can take place now so that you're not in a situation of having to find out about the crisis just as it's starting to occur. And that's the turning point that we want to focus on. Now, many people are in disaster denial, but we live in a time today where everything is foreseeable, and tomorrow anyone can be found accountable. The shootings in San Bernardino, the college last year in Oregon, if we look at these kinds of events and analyzing the information, they were foreseeable. There were indicators there that events were about to occur. And there was the 1993 bombing that occurred in New York City. It was a terrorist event, and they found the terrorist guilty in a criminal court, but there was also a civil suit. And in the civil suit, the jury awarded damages with 2/3 of the liability to go to the building owner, 1/3 to the terrorist, and the rationale was that this was a foreseeable event, and they had a responsibility to create a safe environment. Every parent is concerned about an active shooter. They're concerned that something may happen to their child, and you play a very critical and important role in assuring that protection is there. And that's really where we want to focus our thoughts today as we think about this concept of an intelligence network to determine that this is about to occur. So how do you know what you don't know? That's a question that we're always asked. And as you think about that, there's what you know, that's that green section. There's a section about what you know you don't know. You've got that. But the bigger portion here, the bigger bucket, the bigger part of that circle is what you don't know, you don't know. Our goal here in creating the intelligence network is to use that orange section. Get that over into category you know, or at least you know where your uncertainty comes in. If we can eliminate this from occurring as a surprise, that's going to change the outcomes greatly for you. Now, part of the crisis coach work that we've been doing and talking about, we've introduced to you before to this methodology: predict, plan, perform. Our focus today is going to be right on that predict section there, and we're going to want to understand the vulnerabilities and threats. What are their impacts, how do we monitor them, and what are the triggers that cause us to activate our plans? And that's really where we want to focus, because that's the key element. Now, our goal is to know before now. I mentioned surprise earlier, and I've said in jest that the last time a surprise was good, I was 5 and it was my birthday. If you're finding yourself in a situation where you're surprised at school, that means that there's a problem there that we need to have identified earlier, so that you can already have the program in place to address that threat or risk or exposure. Now, we start all of our plans in the predict area, and you've heard the term all hazards. In fact, that's generally mentioned whether it's a business or a school. Oh, we've got an all hazards approach. We've thought of everything. And you're going to find out, no, you haven't. You may have tried, you may have started, but you're not there. But what I would recommend you do in the coming month to start the year off is get your team that's together, that's helping you with your crisis management at your plan at your school, and sit down. Hazards that we face. What are the vulnerabilities? What are the risks that are out there? Now, they could be natural disasters. We had flooding a few years ago in Nashville as a particular area. We certainly have tornadoes at certain times around the area. Memphis sits on a fault line that there could be earthquakes. We could have an accident that occurs near the school. We could have violence. We're seeing civil unrest around the country. If you look at what happened to schools in Ferguson, in Baltimore, in Chicago, around those types of events, there's a different world that we live in. And so the exposures that are here are escalating, and our understanding and awareness of them, they're also escalating. There are also business crisis risks that happen. We've responded to schools where there's been fraud and loss of funds. There have been other exposures that have occurred within that area, and we'll start talking a little bit about that. But I want you to be able to first sit down with your team and create this matrix. It's called a hazard impact matrix, where you're listing the hazard and then what the impact would be and what the onset would be and what is the impact on people and facilities, and as you go through and look in each of those areas. Then carry it to the next step, and this is one that schools have not done. What's the warning sign for each one of the threats and risks and vulnerabilities that you face? What's the trigger? How bad does it be before we activate our plan? And I'm going to ask you to start thinking about things in terms of guarded, elevated, and severe. Now, we've introduced those terms before in other webinars and workshops with you, and we've thought about it in terms of communicable illness. You've seen the escalation that could occur, and use the guarded, elevated, and severe because you do different actions related to the likelihood that it's occurring in your school and in your area. We also have seen those terms used in the areas of behaviors of concern, identifying them earlier. But it would apply across all of the hazards that you have, and it's a way to start to think about it, and it's the way for you to elevate your game, to elevate your understanding and your execution by beginning to identify each of those at each level. And we're going to give you some tools here in just a minute to help. Now, when we think about disasters and crises, there are 5 common failures, whether you're a school or a business, that comes across through the area. These 5 we've shared with you before, so we're not going to spend a lot of time here today, but failure to control critical supply chains. Who do you depend on externally? Failure to train employees for working at home. And by the way, across the board, 70% of the people don't know what they're supposed to do at work in a crisis, and 95% don't have a disaster plan at home. By the way, give your plan to your newest teacher, ask him or her to read it, and then see if they know what they would do in a particular situation. We find that most plans say what to do, but not how to do it. And that's a quick, easy test that you can do within your school. The third most common is the failure to identify and monitor all threats and risks. Circle that word monitor in your mind. That's really where we're focused today in our conversation, that we're not seeing a monitoring occur on the risks that have already been identified. Yeah, we've seen that that's a risk, but then there's no other action, that people are just waiting for it to occur. This is where you can have the largest impact to increase the safety and security within your school, is by focusing on this monitoring. And we'll give you some tips that you can use to build that intelligence network. Fourth is failure to conduct exercises and update your plans. And last, failure to develop a crisis communications plan with message maps. Instead of trying to figure out what you're going to say in the middle of a crisis, let's go in and look at the various aspects that could occur and put those steps into place now so that you're ready. Now, we solved those 5 common failures with the predict, plan, perform methodology. You identify and involve the groups that you see listed there, you conduct the exercises, and then finally you establish how you're going to monitor. And every time you see that, I want you to think of the word intelligence. And just like a general going to battle, he'd want to know where the enemy is and what their strength is and what they're planning on. And we're going to need to be able to communicate. So those are the areas that I want to see you focus on in our thoughts today as we continue the discussion. So how do you predict? Look at all those words behind our young people: sexual harassment, suicide, active shooter, communicable illness, bullying. We want to be able to take every one of these risks and threats and understanding the warning signs and what the indicators are that would tell us that we need to take action. And that's how we begin to build this intelligence network. So are you saying that you can really predict a crisis? And the answer is yes. by focusing on those warning signs. Many times after a crisis or an event that you see, we can go back and look that the warning signs were there, but they were unheeded because it wasn't a formal process within the school to be able to activate their plan so that they could take action before it escalated. And for every warning sign, there's an indicator. We're going to build that out a little bit more as we talk today. But the real value here is identifying these indicators pre-crisis. So if you're saying, if we see this, then the next thing is going to be the crisis. The next thing is going to be the event. Because we want to see this crisis before it actually happens in the real world and happens within our school. And that's the purpose of where we're focused. We've given you a framework before with the diagnostic model, and we'll expand this in another webinar at a different time. But we could use it as a predictive intelligence tool. And that blue quadrant up there, it's a targeted, extremely urgent event. That's all the natural disasters that you've thought about, the tornadoes, the thunderstorms, the snowstorm, the flooding, those types of events. It's speed is quality. You've got to recover and plan. It's still going to have confusion. It's still going to be a crisis, but it's an event that you've got to think about in that light. But there's more complex underlying exposures that we have. They're difficult, chronic, and severe that start to escalate. And there could be a school situation where we found fraud, where the funds were being spent inappropriately in a private school. So there are opportunities here to identify those earlier before they become systemic, before fraud occurs, before the other elements that start to happen. And then finally, when it escalates all the way to be a very complex problem, urgent, parents are involved, maybe the accreditation people are involved, the authorities that you didn't report that there was a potential threat to a student, and obviously you, as an identified reporter, you have a responsibility at that point in time. So let's go back and think for a minute about intelligence for a moment. Look at the formula at the top of the slide. Information plus insight is equal to intelligence. I want you to remember that because you're providing that insight. There's a lot of information out there. Just think about everything that's available on the internet that's out and around us. But it's your insight that converts that into actionable intelligence. That becomes extremely important at every step along the way to think about those various elements that are there. So as we do that, we want to know before now that it's occurring. And when we know before now, we can then activate our plans and carry forward. Urgency is a function of crisis. If you got a report that there was someone with a gun in your school, you don't have the luxury of time. You have to act immediately at that point in time. If it's a compliance-driven thing, you've got awareness of a potential threat to a student, that maybe there's domestic violence in the student's home or they're contemplating suicide, you've got a reporting and a compliance requirement associated. Fear of loss, brand and reputation. Do you want to be known as the school where this happened and occurred? Maybe it's even a cost savings opportunity or a revenue generating opportunity for you. But what's the urgency here to look at? Now, when we think about this business crisis risk, it's structural, it's operational, it's functional, and looking at those processes, and we're going to go through that more in a later webinar. But right now, we're focused on the impact that we're going to have on our people, on our profitability, and our brand and reputation. Our goal is to identify impending risk before they occur. The risk is there. Is it escalating into a crisis? How do we know that? What actions can we do to cause that to be prevented? And so we're going to be focusing on building this intelligence network. Now, when we think about that, there's different levels of information we need at different times. Now, all of our plans are built around 5 stages of escalation in a crisis. There's pre-action, onset, impact assessment, response and recovery, and post, where we're dealing with the consequences of the action that occurred. Pre-action, what are you doing? Well, it's like you're doing today. You're attending this webinar to get some more information so that you can continue to work on your plan. Training your people. It's running the test associated with it. It's getting the emergency supplies in place. It's building the intelligence network that's going to let you know that something's going to happen. When the event occurs, it's going to be Well, how do I know that it happened? That is a key portion of the intelligence that's going to be fitting in. At onset, you're going to be concerned about life and safety, the evacuate, the shelter in place, the lockdown, the lockout. Those are going to be the urgent elements that you're going to be focused on. Shortly then, it'll move from your emergency plan into an impact assessment. How bad was it? Did we have multiple students hurt? Did we have the loss of life? How widespread is this problem? If it's a crisis, then we're activating the crisis plan, getting the school leadership in place to be able to deal with it and carrying that forward, and then the recovery plans. How do we get back to normal in our schools to get our classes back starting to come together, and then post the analysis of what worked well, what didn't work well, how can we come in and change and improve our plans. Now, so where do we start all of this? We go right back to where we started the conversation today in doing this vulnerability analysis. Now, you've made the long list of the hazards and risks that your school is facing, and I want you to think about them on two levels. One is the impact that that risk could have, and the second is the certainty that it would occur. Those things that are low to medium impact, that's the normal operations. You've had teachers not show up, and you've been able to deal with the school. You've had other things that have occurred, and it's just part of running a school, and those events would happen. But once you get to where something is potential high impact, even if it's a low certainty, you need to have a contingency plan in place, because the consequences of that impact are so adverse that we have no choice but to be ready. And clearly, if it's high impact and high certainty, then we don't have any choice. We have to have a plan in place to deal with that, and that's all the plans that you've been working on. But now I want you to take this vulnerability analysis where you map these out. You can rank order them with impact and certainty and start to carry it to the next level so that we can look at the warning signs and indicators associated with each and every risk that you've already identified. Now, we're going to introduce a couple of new terms here to think about. One is a risk derivative. You can't measure some things directly. Fraud. There's no way to see fraud. You can only see the results of fraud that occur. Attendance in the school. If you've got a high absenteeism rate, maybe that means that there's a communicable illness that's present there. It could be that students have stayed home because they were afraid of something that was going to happen at school today. So attendance becomes an indicator. Behaviors of concern become indicators. Maybe you've had a student that's been very good academically, but suddenly starts missing classes or not performing well on the test, or maybe gets into fights at the school. There's been a change in behavior. That behavioral change is a derivative of an underlying problem that you can see and you can address with that. Communications. When people are concerned, they talk, and where do people talk today? They talk on social media. And that's an opportunity to see that and intervene earlier. We set up a geofence around the distribution center for a large company. We found an employee that was having problems with his boss, and the problems were racial. And at the end of the day, his last posting said, the only way to solve this is with a gun. I'm bringing a gun to work tomorrow, and we're going to settle this once and for all. Well, wouldn't you want to know that today instead of tomorrow when the gun comes to school? Those are the aspects that are looking at it. We're working right now with a large franchisor that has 800 restaurants scattered around the United States, and we're looking at everything that's occurring within a 1-mile radius of the restaurants. All the civil unrest that they're seeing out there, the violence potential there, they want to know, is something happening in the neighborhood of our restaurant so that we can intervene beforehand. We've uncovered violence, drug deals, a variety of other things by having these intelligence networks in place. Wouldn't you want to know something is happening around your school? Again, another opportunity to do that. You're already doing this with weather. You get the weather reports and make a decision. Oh, should we be open today? Should we close? Is the threat of the storm so great? So you've had the opportunity to start to do that in weather-related risk. You probably are doing an excellent job in looking at the warning signs and the indicators, and you have the tools to do that, whether it's going on and looking at things, alerts online, or even getting alerts from a variety of other services. Take that same approach and now apply it to every risk and threat that you've already identified. So you've done a great job. You've identified a whole list of risks. Now get your team together and look at the other columns in that blue table at the bottom of the page. What's the warning sign associated with this risk? Maybe there are multiple, so you could have the risk repeated and list the several warning signs. What's the indicator that that warning sign is occurring? What tools or medium do we have? We follow those indicators. What's the particular trigger that causes us to then activate our plans and do something? It's not enough to know that that's happening. When does it reach a level where we intervene and carry forward? And then think about that risk at a guarded level, an elevated, or severe. See the chart in the upper right-hand corner of the slide and the grid that's there? If you look at that blue line, that's kind of like, in this organization, they define it as kind of a mid-level area they're looking at. The rose-colored curve that's listed there is a particular risk that they're mapping. Well, they're always going to be, at least on an awareness level, that's the guarded level, the one in green. But at the slope of that line, if they start to see the indicators that it's escalating, then that lets them know that they're in an elevated risk, and maybe they need to start doing some other things with their plans. And then finally, if it's at a severe risk level, highly probable it's going to be occurring, there's no choice in the actions that you're immediately going to take. So understanding those and understanding where you are at any given time associated with each risk is what we're talking about today. This is the way how you take your plans and start to elevate them to the next level so that you're activating them at exactly the correct time. So as we think about each of those, I want to give you some tools on where we take this from here and start to put it into the terms that you're looking at. First, awareness. Now, this is a standard protocol that's used in schools around the country. Evacuate, lock down, lock out, shelter in place. Now, if you've seen on one piece of paper, we're organizing that information to make it available to students and teachers. Here's the condition for this action. Here's the directive that we're going to send out, the communications, and here's the action that we want them to take. So as you think about your plan, start to organize them in this manner, and so on a single piece of paper, so everyone would have the information that they need at that point in time. Now, there are other ways to activate, and here's one on the left that a company did in looking at their concerns for their event activation matrix. They divided it into a minor event, an incident, or a business crisis. And you can see they were concerned about data security, facility, human, operational, power, social media, and workplace violence. And then they've got an indicator here of how do you know that it's occurring and what do they need to do, and then whether they notify their executive leadership at an incident. So in a facility that the damage was minor, they would handle it. If it looks like it's a major damage to the facility, they would have their executive committee informed. Clearly, if it was in that second category down in there, category 2, a business crisis, immediately they would involve their executive leadership. So it's not just schools, it's not just businesses. Look at to the right of the piece of paper. You will see there a church service event activation matrix. They were concerned about an imminent weather event, an imminent violence event outside of their church, an imminent violence event inside but not in the sanctuary, imminent physical threat in the building, medical emergency, or imminent violence in the sanctuary. So they defined the action that they would take, the message that they would give, what they would have their ushers do, and what their crisis management team would do. This is a large church, and they're concerned about these areas. And think about the shootings that occurred in the church in Charleston last year. We're seeing violence coming into businesses, schools, and churches. So planning in advance, getting the directions down into a simple format becomes an easier way. I want to show you one other matrix. This one's on cyber breach, but it gives you another idea. This group was focused on what the impacts are on their information assets and technology, their brand and reputation, and their users from a cyber breach. They created a level 1, a level 2, and a level 3. Think guarded, elevated, and severe. And it's associated with the probability that that's occurring. So they start to look at and identify who then would have responsibility to take action associated with it. You should be able to take your plans and to boil them down to, here are our indicators, here's our activation matrix, so that everybody understands exactly where you are at any point in time. Now, we look at a process, we use listen and look. Listening is more of a general understanding of what's going on. You can hear what your students are talking about. You can look on social media at streams, phrases, and words, and it's creating a general situational awareness level for you. Once you see a particular concern, an event, a person of interest, then you can look closely at them. And we can do that through a variety of different tools that are there to create this virtual investigation so that you understand, is there an escalation attempt, and is it a point that we need to intervene? But you've got to have a procedure in place to take that anonymous report, to take the information and intelligence that you brought in, looked at the information, added your insight to it, now you have intelligence. How are you going to activate your plans, and what are you going to need to do? I'm going to step you through a work scenario. This is actually a report that we saw where this person said, I'm going to kill somebody at work today. We got this last August. And so you've got to figure out, well, wait a minute, we heard something, we're now listening. Now we need to look at this person. Maybe we need to look at what other postings were coming up. Knowing I have to go to work in the morning makes me want to kill myself. Well, if you had a student that was contemplating suicide, you'd want to know before that event escalated to the actual actions. Are they just frustrated? Is there more? Are there other messages related about this person? What are people saying? What has the conversation been at this point in time? But you'd want to assign this to a particular person to figure out, how do we proceed? We've got the warning signs. What are the triggers here now? What's the process? Who's responsible? In this situation, we're saying we assigned it to Susie Laughlin to look into. So you need to have a design and monitoring program with an immediate built-in escalation to get the attention brought to those individuals that need to have it addressed. So if you have a mapped escalation, then the student's not going to fall through the cracks, that there's not going to be an opportunity to make a difference that's been missed associated with it. And so you're seeing this one we directed to Karen Mazzullo, and this person is exhibiting behaviors of concern. Please look into it, provide further context, and report back to me immediately. So as you think about that, think about what you've done in your school. Think about all of the risks and threats that you've identified. Have you identified warning signs and indicators and triggers for each one? And if those triggers are activated, if those indicators are there, is there a clear process for that to be assigned to someone to intervene? Because what we know is that when minutes matter, seconds count even more. And so when we look at this, the time to intervene is not when the gun comes to school, but before those events start to occur. So what happens when those events are there? There's a lot of things going on. There are a lot of moving parts, and we don't want you to have to wait to try to figure out, oh, now what do we do? Do you know? Do your employees know? Do your teachers know? Do you activate your security? Are you calling 911? Who's involved in this? What's the process? And have you tested this to better understand? Because we don't have the luxury of time at a matter at this point. We need to identify and intervene immediately to be able to take advantage of it. I want to give you one more example, and then we'll talk about where we go from here. If you look at this, here's an employee who identified that there was a particular problem, and it was turned over to be investigated by the police, who turned it over to federal. You'll see that this became a terrorist charge and other elements that came through. This was a college that was associated with it. This information is out there on the internet, and you're expected to know what's going on within your school community. This is an opportunity for you to be able to say, we need to activate our plans. We need to intervene before this threat comes up. Last year we saw violence in multiple independent and private schools around the country. I'm amazed at the number of people that are attacked with baseball bats. We saw sexual abuse and sexual assault occurring. And we saw it occurring not only among students, but with faculty, and in several cases we had heads of schools involved. So this is an area in time in which the knowledge is out there. It's up to us to look at all of the hazards that you've identified, all of the risks that you've identified, all the threats that you've identified, all the vulnerabilities, and ask you to go back and identify, okay, for this one, what's a warning sign that this is starting to happen? What are the stages of escalation so that we know we're at guarded, elevated, or severe? What's the indicator, the trigger to cause us to activate our plans? That's how we begin to take our planning and making it more actionable. The second suggestion that I have is, again, the same one that I shared earlier about making sure that you take one of your newest teachers, have them read your plans, and ask them, does it tell you how to do what you're supposed to do here? If it's not clear to them, it's not clear to anyone. And that's the easiest first test that you can take a look at your plans. Now, so what do we do now? Do you want to know what's going to happen tomorrow? That's a question that I think you and your crisis team at the school should stop and ask. And if you answer that as yes, then you can begin to start to build this intelligence network that we talked about. I think that that's an area that you can't afford not to know. You have to be able to do this before it's going to occur. There's several opportunities that you can have and you can take advantage of. I mentioned earlier the active shooter exercise for your team on February the 18th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, for schools. It will be a 2-hour active shooter exercise. It will be a tabletop exercise, so you can go through looking at the decisions, and there will be lots of emphasis on the intelligence network and the things that we talked about in that exercise, and a chance for you to do it. Please sign up and register for that. Again, it's at no cost. There's also going to be a Crisis Coach workshop in Tennessee on March the 3rd, and it'll be a chance for you to bring your plans in, meet with other schools, and we'll kind of review the plans together and talk about them as a group and go through an exercise to focus on the decisions that you need to make and to carry forward. I would want you to make sure your plans are practices. I think that's critical for us and you and your school, and to know that. If you have any questions about that, the Tennessee Association of Independent Schools has made available an assessment of your plans at no cost to you. That's a $2,500 assessment. Chad White, Firestorm Principal, will be glad to do that for you. Begin now to start to design this intelligence network. You've gotten some basic information today. You know where to start with your hazard matrix or your vulnerability analysis. Now begin looking at the warning signs and the indicators and the triggers. I think that over the next year or two, you want to move to making sure your plans are available on teachers' smartphones. Instead of having that binder on the shelf, getting that plan in the hands of the people who need it, whether it's your emergency plan or your incident plan or your crisis management plan, that it's there. There's an opportunity to do that, and it can be done in a cost-effective way. And schedule some training. Come to the workshops that are there, continue to attend these webinar series, or if you need specific training within your school, let us know. We would be glad to help. You can download the brief from today's webinar on firestorm.com, and it'll give you an overview of what we've talked about. There'll also be a copy recording of today's webinar, so that if you want to listen to it again or share it with others in your school, you can do that. And again, it's at no cost to you or your school. So we want to thank the Tennessee Association of Independent Schools, and Rich in particular, that your help and leadership and insight and helping the schools in the state of Tennessee and the difference that you've made. Rich, any comments that you want to add today as we start to wind down our discussion?
Just a couple of things. Thanks, Jim, for a great webinar. As always, you do a wonderful job, and this was interesting, I thought, and very useful. I want to make sure people know to sign up for, in January, we've got the curriculum unit planning using the Understanding by Design model. It's very popular. We've got 50 people signed up. There's still a chance for a few more to join if they want to. That's coming up the 20th of January at Franklin Road Academy. And we also have 2 division head roundtables, one for lower school and early childhood, one for middle and upper school. They're going to be back-to-back And they'll be focusing on issues having to do with supervising and evaluating teachers, one of the things division heads are one of their most important jobs, and we'll start with that and then go on to discuss other issues that are of interest. I do also want to mention the next webinar in the Firestorm Crisis Coach Series will be February 11th, Thursday at 10 o'clock, and it's titled But It Was Such a Little Fish. It's a cybersecurity webinar. I think everyone will be interested in that as well. Thanks a lot, Jim, and back to you.
I appreciate it. There are a lot of opportunities to take advantage of, and I think schools acting together make a difference. And the Tennessee Association of Independent Schools serves as that forum and catalyst for that area, and there's a great return on your investment in membership there, and it proves as a differentiator. But sitting in a room, talking with others who are facing the same problems that you face, make a difference, and that's an opportunity. One of the crises that we responded to last year, not in Tennessee, was use of a teacher on and actors. But one of the comments and observations were we really weren't happy with the teacher in the classroom anyway. So teacher performance is an indicator, even indirectly, of potential I want to be concerned about. So that Rich pointed out have value beyond just the direct. There's also, we're very excited that Firestorm passed the 10-year mark, and so part of that celebration of our 10-year anniversary are these virtual exercises that we're giving away. The cyber breach exercise in December had over 890 participants. We had half of the Fortune 500 attending. We're anticipating that each of the 2 workshops in February exercises, the school and the business will have over 1,000 in attendance to each. That's part of our opportunity to give back. If you have questions, you can contact us at firestorm.com. There's a comment section there. You can also link to the brief that we've talked about or to listen to this recording or others in the Crisis Coach webinar series. If you've got questions, send us an email at webinars@firestorm.com or pick up the phone and call us at 800-321-2219. We appreciate everything you do every day. The difference that you're making in the lives of our young people is tremendous. The education, the intelligence that you're communicating to them, they're helping them to grow morally, spiritually, athletically, academically, is pivotal in their lives and shaping the future. We don't want to see a disaster or crisis disrupt those activities. That's why we're spending so much time talking about what you can do and what you need to do now. That becomes extremely critical. Having an intelligence network, understanding that there are now some behaviors of concern starting to exhibit themselves. Intervening early versus intervening late is a disproportional impact. So I would encourage you to think about those things now. Start building those lists out. We can flesh them out more in the workshop. We'll continue to be talking about them, but there are new challenges that we're facing. It's different than the times that we went to school and the exposures that our young people see each and every day. Your school plays a pivotal role in helping in that particular area. Thank you again for what you've done. Thank you for spending some time with us today. I'm sorry that you didn't win the lottery. By the way, if you did, please invite me to the party. I imagine it will be spectacular. So since none of us got $1.6 billion yesterday, let's make sure that we're ready for tomorrow in our school. Have a great day, everyone. Until next month, goodbye.